The new trailer for the long-awaited game Kingdom Come Deliverance II is just a few weeks old, and anyone who has played the first part will certainly have an idea of what it's about and where the journey is headed, namely back to Bohemia and the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation in the 15th century, right into the heart of Europe in the late Middle Ages. I personally devoured the first part and played through it multiple times, always being impressed by the attention to detail and the great effort with which the Czech team and Warhol Studios and Daniel Vávra brought the world of medieval Bohemia to life. I think they managed to create a fantasy RPG that adheres closely to real history, taking realism and historical accuracy very seriously. If you are a fan of history and if you like lore, and in which case Kingdom Come Deliverance, the lore of Kingdom Come Deliverance is actual history, and there are numerous historical details in this trailer alone that are worth examining more closely. Our protagonist Henry, or Heinrich in German, once again roams the beautiful Bohemian landscape. And for those of you who don't know, this is already very interesting because Bohemia is one of the oldest continuously inhabited regions in Europe. The name Bohemia derives itself from the Celtic tribe of Boy, and Slavs, Celts and Germans and Germanic tribes have always melted in this area, and this area has always been a melting pot, a meeting point, and just a place where cultures meet, and human settlements have been documented there since the early Stone Ages. Bohemia in the 15th century is even more significant because it was one of the wealthier and more developed countries within the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, which at that time dominated almost all of Central Europe and encompassed most of the German-speaking regions in the continent. In Bohemia itself, Czechs and Germans lived together, which was reflected in the bilingual nature of many towns and villages and the entire region. Those who remember the first part will recall King Charles IV, König Karl, as he is called in Germany, and a few decades earlier he made Prague into the capital, de facto capital of the Holy Roman Empire, and the city and the surrounding region of Bohemia experienced unprecedented flourishing and growth, and Bohemia and Moravia are still among Europe's cultural gems today. Alright, let's start with the trailer. It immediately shows a battle, and just by the soldier who was just hit by an arrow, we can clearly see that Warhol Studios did their homework. The fighter in the image is apparently a gunner armed with a hand cannon, an early and somewhat widespread firearm in Europe that originated in China and began to be used in the West from the 15th century, supposedly first in Italy in 1326, and these hand cannons were also used in the Near and in the Middle East decades earlier. But in this soldier we see quite well that we are transitioning into an era that no longer is purely medieval. Soldiers are still using bows and swords and shields, but they are also increasingly using firearms, and this would later be significant in the so-called Hussite Wars, Hussitenkriege, which took place in Bohemia a few years after Kingdom Come Deliverance, at least in real history, and these firearms were used in this conflict extensively, and the war tactics changed accordingly. Of course, they were relatively primitive by today's standards. They were actually inferior to regular bows and crossbows, but were much cheaper to produce, and it didn't take much training to teach a man to use one. They were thus cheap and good enough, and targets up to 100 meters could be hit. To use a hand cannon, the soldier had to basically light a powder charge with a match, making use in the rain nearly impossible, and the weapon was prone to break in and to fail. The rest of the soldier's uniform appears authentic enough and historically accurate. He wears a so-called kettle hat, which was extremely popular and used by almost all common foot soldiers at the time. They came in various designs and shapes, and he also wears a type of surcoat over chainmail, which is also relatively historically accurate, and it looks very coherent. Well, in this scene, it's very nice to see that the attackers use Pavesen in German, large shields protecting them from arrows and other projectiles during the assault on the castle. Contrary to frequent portrayals in games and movies, it was not common for armies to charge at castles with raised swords while yelling a battle cry. Sieges were very laborious and lengthy undertakings, and the exchange of projectiles was as normal as starving out the soldiers in the castle. Even back then, the principle of fire and movement applied during an attack, which meant that the attackers tried to keep the defenders pinned down with archers, crossbowmen and hand cannon shooters, allowing them to place ladders on the wall and to eventually storm the castle in a frontal assault, which was often very costly. Trebuchets were outdated weapons by this time in the early 15th century. Larger gunpowder cannons were already becoming the standard on the battlefield, however it is not unrealistic that some armies still use trebuchets.
Take cover!
Here again we can see the beautiful Bohemian landscape, which is very nicely depicted with lots of greenery, fertile land, forests and mountains. It is scenically similar to Bavaria but still unique, and Bohemia was a relatively wealthy country within the Roman Empire at that time and one of the more powerful regions in Europe. It was also an agricultural breadbasket and remains one to this day. If you like Czech beer, this is where it comes from. One thing often misrepresented in media is that people in the Middle Ages didn't all wear brown, grey and mud-colored clothing, and they didn't live in filth, at least not normally. On the contrary, clean, colorful clothing was very common. Colorful clothing, as seen in the first part of the game, were the norm, not the exception. Here we likely see the town of Kuttenberg or Kutna-Hora, which players will be able to visit in the second part. Kuttenberg was one of the most splendid and important cities in Bohemia and the Empire, and it lies not far from Prague and still retains much of its medieval architecture. I think it's worth a visit, and the name Kutna-Hora is a linguistic reference to digging for ore, indicating the history of silver mining in the town. At that time, Kuttenberg was even the second largest city in Bohemia and Moravia, a resident city and a central mint where many of the coins of the kingdom were minted. During Henry's time in Kingdom Come, Kutna-Hora was mainly inhabited by the Czech Catholics, but also they had German and Jewish residents. The city today is still filled with beautiful religious buildings such as the Cistercian Monastery of Sedlec and the Church of St. Mary, among others.
I always dreamt of leaving this place. Becoming more than a peasant.
You know the trouble with an adventurous life?
Here the soldiers' armor is very nicely depicted. They wear chainmail with a gambeson or surecoat over it, clearly visible on the left. This one archer carries a crossbow, which was an immensely significant weapon of the time because it could penetrate most armor and was easy to use. The crossbow nearly completely replaced the bow as a ranged weapon in Europe, and it was such a deadly weapon that in the 12th century Pope Innocent II banned its use against Christians, as even simple peasants could easily kill a knight with it. Of course, no one actually adhered to this ban.
It can end before it gets started.
The knight on the left wears a bassinet or hound skull with a visor, known in German as Hundskugel. It was quite a popular helmet until the mid-15th century, and the visor could be lifted for better visibility and its shape deflected blows and thrusts to the side. However, as you can clearly see, it has a limited field of vision, which of course was a disadvantage, and such helmets were very expensive, so an ordinary soldier wouldn't wear them. Here we have some mounted knights and soldiers. On the right we see a shield with a coat of arms, but I can't say exactly to whom it belongs. Even in the 15th century, feudal lords used heraldry as identification. I think we can see Henry and his comrades who are still loyal to King Wenzel. Fun fact, yellow and black are the colors of the Holy Roman Empire, which is also found on the imperial flag. And this is the villain from the first part, Marquard von Aulitz. Spoiler alert, he is the murderer of Henry's parents. The German nobleman is a follower of Sigismund of Luxembourg, who along with the Cumans invades Bohemia and covets the Bohemian crown in the first part of the game. I think in Czech he is called Marquard von Ulice, which in Bohemia is to this day a small village in the region of Pilsen, where the famous beer is coming from. Marquardt is the name for this apparently minor noble, and the name derives itself from the old German word Marquardt, which just means protector of the border or defender of the border region.
Congratulations, Sir Knight! You finally become a man.
Wake up! Pull yourself together, Henry.
Fun fact, there are still over 930 castles in the Czech Republic today, and the entire region of Bavaria, Austria, the Czech Republic, Romania, Slovakia is still full of castles and fortifications, often built for defense against the Huns, the Mongols and other host nomads from Asia, as well as against the nearest neighbor, of course.
Nobody will hand anything on a platter to men like you and me.
You still have a long way to go till your work is done.
Here we can see the hand cannon in action. The shooter would basically have to light the fuse and have a second or so only to aim the gun in the rough direction of the enemy. There would be lots of smoke and a deafening sound. Those who played the first part already know Henry is not actually the son of a simple blacksmith, but of a powerful nobleman. However, he is illegitimate, making him a bastard. Still, being the son of a nobleman places him higher in the social hierarchy than commoners, and many bastards have claimed inheritance, and illegitimate sons often climb the social ladder.
O merciful God, be kind and protect us, so we don't blow our arses off. Amen.
The soldier on the right wears a brigandine, quite modern and advanced for Henry's era. This type of armor became more common after 1500, I think. After this clip there comes a bit of talk from the developers from Warhorse with a few more scenes from the game. And here in this picture we can see Henry, who is wearing plate armor, which looks very modern, almost too modern for this time. I mean, such plate armor became fashionable only at the end of the 15th century, I think. It basically offered enormous protection against slashing and stabbing weapons, and Henry is very well equipped for his era, far away from his early days as a simple servant.
Or we can help to punish it for its sins.
Here we can see one of the Cumans, or Kumanen, or Kipchak, as they are called. They are the enemy from the first game, and we can see the Cumans have set up camp in the forest. And large parts of Central Europe were much more forested than today, making the forest basically omnipresent for many people. In the then very densely populated Bohemia, about 2 to 3 million people lived, mostly in villages. But those villages were separated by a few roads and then mostly forest. And many villages didn't have the luxury of a city guard or nearby knights. Although they existed, a small, determined band of bandits could terrorize the countryside for weeks. The Cuman bows seen here are composite bows, smaller and more compact, and suitable for use from horseback, as the Cumans are people from Central and Western Asia. They were probably Turkic speaking, but ethnically mixed with many peoples of the Caspian and the Black Sea regions. So originally an Asian group that fled westward during the Mongol invasion in the 13th century, engaging in conflicts with European peoples, but also serving as mercenaries and eventually settling in Europe, blending in with other populations. Their linguistic traces can still be found in Hungary today, the entire Balkans and present-day Ukraine. And some historical sources describe the Cumans as very mixed looking, not purely Asian, but with many blonde and blue-eyed individuals. And Chinese sources also mention that they appeared more European, or at least mixed, but historians tend to disagree on many things. A few years earlier, still under the rule of King Charles, the father of Wenzel, the plague had raged throughout the empire and flood disasters had devastated entire regions. Nevertheless, under his reign, especially southern Germany and Bohemia flourished. Prosperity is still evident today. For a game set in medieval Europe, I think there's hardly a better setting. So I think that's everything historical that comes to my mind from this trailer. I'm sure there might be more to talk about and to go into more detail about, but feel free to comment if you feel that something should be mentioned. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give us a like and explore our channel for more content about sword and sorcery, fantasy and the like, and see you next time.